The air was thick with laughter, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the murmur of conversations that danced through the lavish wedding reception. Golden light spilled from crystal chandeliers, casting a soft glow on the tuxedos and designer gowns of the guests, all carefully curated and polished to perfection. In the corner, an elegant string quartet played, its notes floating like delicate whispers across the room. It was the kind of evening where everything seemed as it should be, perfect, pristine, and full of promises. And yet, in the midst of it all, Marcus felt like a ghost. Standing alone at the center of the room, his dark skin and modest tuxedo felt out of place amidst the sea of luxury. He had always been an outsider here, and tonight, that truth seemed louder than ever. He was used to being the only black face in spaces like these, used to the discomfort that seemed to swirl around him like an invisible cloud. But tonight, it was different. The sharpness of the stares, the uncomfortable silence that followed his arrival, was more pronounced. His presence had been a silent question. A reminder of things the guests would rather not think about. He cleared his throat and took the microphone, the sound of the room quieting instantly, as if waiting for something to happen. He knew what they were thinking. It was his moment to speak, a tradition, a chance to give a toast to the newlyweds. But in the back of his mind, Marcus could feel the weight of their eyes, each one calculating, judging, expecting. They hadn't imagined him in this position. They hadn't imagined him in a tuxedo, standing here like they were. Not in their world. Not in their circle. His best friend, the groom, stood beside him with a strained smile, his face flashing with the faintest bit of discomfort. He had always been part of the world that Marcus was now trying to navigate, wealthy, privileged, untouchable. They had been close once, growing up together, running through the streets of their neighborhood with the same dreams, the same struggles. But as the years passed, their paths diverged. Marcus had fought harder, worked longer, to get where he was, but still, there was something about this place that felt like a constant reminder of the gap between them. Marcus cleared his throat again, his fingers trembling slightly as he adjusted the microphone. The room was waiting. The laughter, the chatter, the joy that had filled the air moments ago, gone. Replaced by the suffocating silence that always seemed to follow him in these moments. His heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to smile, to speak. "To the bride and groom," he began, his voice steady but tinged with a tightness he couldn't hide. "May your love grow stronger with each passing day." His words were rehearsed, safe, but as he spoke, his mind wandered back to the years he and the groom had spent together. They had dreamed together, laughed together, shared secrets. Once they had been equals. But standing here, speaking in front of these strangers, it was hard to ignore the truth that they were no longer the same. They were worlds apart, and no matter how much he tried to bridge that gap, it seemed to stretch wider each time. A few guests exchanged glances, their smiles strained, and their eyes flickered with something that felt more like pity than appreciation. Marcus could feel it, knew exactly what they were thinking. They weren't used to seeing someone like him in their world. Their gaze shifted uneasily, settling on him like a stain they couldn't quite scrub away. One of the women, sitting near the front, whispered something under her breath. Marcus couldn't catch the words, but he didn't need to. He could feel her gaze burn through him, could feel the weight of her judgment. His smile tightened, his hands gripping the edge of the podium as he fought to stay calm. But his words faltered. The sting of rejection hit him harder than he expected, and for a moment, he considered walking away. But no. He wouldn't let them win. He wasn't going to back down. This was his moment too. He straightened his back, pushed through the discomfort, and finished the toast. The claps that followed were hollow, polite, the kind that echoed through the room without actually reaching anyone's heart. Marcus stood there, frozen, as the crowd slowly returned to their conversations. But as he moved to sit back down, something unexpected happened. The groom, his old friend, caught Marcus's eye. There was a pause, a beat of silence. The smile the groom gave him wasn't one of affection, not the warm, familiar smile Marcus remembered from their childhood. No, this smile was something else, something distant. And then, without a word, the groom raised his hand and gave him a salute. It wasn't a friendly gesture. It wasn't a sign of respect. It was mocking, a reminder of the distance that had grown between them. A subtle, yet unmistakable gesture of power, of control. The message was clear: Marcus was an outsider here. Always had been. Always would be. The room fell silent. The guests froze, their eyes darting between Marcus and the groom, unsure of how to react. But Marcus, standing there, felt the weight of that salute hit him like a blow. It was a cruel reminder of everything he had fought against, everything he had worked for. His throat tightened. His chest constricted with emotion, but he didn't let it show. He stood there, fighting back the tears that threatened to rise. The humiliation was sharp, bitter, and it burned in his gut. But just as quickly as it came, it passed. A fire ignited in Marcus, deep within him, and he knew this wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning. He wasn't going to be silenced. He wasn't going to fade into the background. He would rise above this. And when the time came, he would make sure everyone in this room, especially the groom, would understand that his dignity, his worth, could never be measured by their standards. Marcus turned on his heel, walked away from the stunned crowd, and left the dance floor. But inside, a storm was brewing. And it was only just beginning. The evening dragged on like a slow, suffocating tide, each passing moment heavier than the last. Marcus stood by the large windows, the golden light of the reception hall stretching out across the darkened landscape. The laughter and chatter of the guests felt like an alien language, one he couldn't quite understand, even as the sound washed over him. Glasses clinked, toasts were made, but the joy that should have filled the air was hollow. It was like being in a room full of people, yet feeling more alone than ever. His tuxedo, pressed and neat, felt like a costume, something that didn't quite belong on his body. This wasn't his world. It never had been. His mind kept drifting back to that moment, when the groom, his childhood friend, had raised his hand and mocked him with that damned salute. It echoed in his ears, louder than any of the polite applause he'd received after the toast. Marcus couldn't shake it. The sting of that small but cutting gesture was too much. It made him question everything, the years of friendship, the times they'd shared, the bond they'd once had. Once they had been equals. They had run together through rough neighborhoods, dreaming about their futures, their successes. But now, as Marcus stood in that opulent ballroom, the gap between them seemed insurmountable. The groom had crossed over to a world Marcus could never truly belong to, a world where Marcus was little more than an outsider, an accessory, a novelty. He overheard the whispers. They were soft at first, just background noise, but they grew louder, sharper. "Why is he even here?" someone asked, their voice just loud enough for Marcus to catch. "Does he know what he's supposed to be doing?" Another guest murmured. "Does he even belong in this kind of setting?" The words hit him like arrows, and though he stood frozen, his insides twisted in pain. The old insecurities crept up, clawing at him. He had worked hard to get here, to be seen as more than the kid from the wrong side of town, more than the black man who had to prove his worth to everyone. But now, standing among these people, it all felt like a futile fight. He could feel the weight of their judgment, their quiet scrutiny. Marcus tried to brush it off. He told himself he had no reason to care about the opinions of strangers, but the truth was, it stung. He had known these people for years, some of them, since childhood. Yet tonight, it was as if he had walked into a room full of strangers who didn't know him at all. The gap between them was more than just economic. It was cultural, it was racial, it was everything he had been trying to break down. And now, it felt insurmountable. The groom's new wife, her cold smile etched into his memory, approached him. Her presence was polite, almost too polite, like she was performing a duty rather than offering genuine warmth. "Would you like to dance?" she asked, her voice soft but distant. It was a polite invitation, no more, no less. But as she extended her hand, the eyes of the guests turned toward them, like they were all waiting for something. Waiting to see how this would play out. Marcus hesitated, feeling the weight of their stares like physical hands pressing against his chest. He could hear the whispers again, sharper now, as if they were all waiting for him to prove something. He took her hand, and they moved to the dance floor. The music played, but it felt like it was coming from far away, distant, as though the world around him had slowed to a crawl. Every step he took felt like it was under a microscope, every movement scrutinized, judged. He could feel the cold glances of the guests on his back, could sense their curiosity, their discomfort. Was this some kind of charity dance? Were they expecting him to perform, to prove that he could belong in their world if only for a few minutes? His heart beat faster, but his face remained calm, the mask of composure firmly in place. As they danced, the weight of the moment pressed down on him. The glances, the whispers, the polite yet cold gestures, they all collided, and he couldn't escape them. Marcus realized then that it wasn't about the dance at all. It wasn't about the groom's wife, or the wedding, or the music. It was about how they saw him. He was a token, a novelty, an experiment in diversity, a man they had allowed into their world but never truly accepted into their hearts. He was the one who was different, the one who didn't quite fit, and they weren't sure whether to celebrate it or pity it. It hurt more than Marcus cared to admit. His fists clenched at his sides, hidden from view. His chest tightened with anger, frustration, and something much deeper, something he had been carrying for far too long. How long could he keep pretending that he belonged? How long could he mask the feelings of isolation, the sting of rejection that seemed to follow him wherever he went? His mind raced, but his body moved with the same grace as the guests around him, as if none of it bothered him. As if he wasn't breaking inside. The dance ended, and he stepped back. The polite applause from the guests felt like an empty echo in his ears, a hollow acknowledgement of something they didn't truly understand. Marcus nodded, his smile still intact, but inside, he was unraveling. He could hear the voices again, louder now, louder than the music. "He's not one of us," they seemed to say. "He doesn't belong here." The imbalance between them was too much to bear. He had tried to make peace with it, had tried to blend in, to find common ground. But tonight, it was impossible to ignore. The weight of their judgments, the subtle exclusions, the unspoken rules, they were all too much. Yet, despite it all, Marcus knew deep down that he wasn't going to let this define him. Not tonight. Not ever again. The evening dragged on, but Marcus didn't stay. He excused himself from the crowd, slipped quietly into the shadows of the ballroom, where no one could see him, where no one could judge him. The fight inside him, the anger and hurt, still burned. But this wasn't the end. It couldn't be. The injustice, the unfairness, it had reached its peak. But something inside Marcus was changing. He wasn't going to remain silent forever. This story wasn't finished yet. Marcus stood there, alone in the crowd, his pulse racing as the laughter and the hum of conversation faded into a dull blur. He felt like a shadow in the corner of the room, trying to disappear, but the weight of their gaze, their judgment, was suffocating. The sting of the salute, the whispers, the dismissive stares, they all twisted inside him like a knot he couldn't untangle. He had told himself this night would be different, that maybe he could just slip through the cracks and pretend it didn't hurt. But the reality was far crueler. This wasn't a place for him. Not anymore. Not with them. The groom, his childhood friend, stood across the room, surrounded by the laughter of his new life, his new world. The image of the man who had once shared dreams with him, laughed with him, fought the same battles, now seemed like a distant memory. The years of shared struggles, the nights spent dreaming of success, seemed irrelevant in a space so full of glittering wealth and privilege. Marcus had worked for everything he had, clawing his way through the dirt and dust, but in a room like this, all that effort felt meaningless. And then, without warning, the groom made his way across the room. His movements were slow, deliberate, and Marcus's heart sank. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, but he stood his ground. The guests barely noticed as the groom approached. They were too busy enjoying the spectacle of the evening, oblivious to the tension that had been growing between Marcus and his old friend. The groom stopped in front of him, a hesitant smile playing on his lips. "Marcus, can we talk for a second?" His voice was soft, almost apologetic. Marcus didn't say anything at first. He couldn't. He just nodded, his throat tight with the bitter taste of all the things he couldn't say. The groom led him away from the crowd, out into the quieter, dimly lit hallway that stretched beyond the ballroom. The sounds of the celebration still filtered through the walls, distant and foreign. They stood there, facing each other. The groom's hands were clasped together, his shoulders stiff. There was no warmth in his smile, just a kind of nervous tension that made Marcus feel even more out of place. "I just wanted to check in," the groom said, his voice low. "I know it's been a lot tonight, with everything going on. You know how these things are. My family, the pressure, the expectations. It's just a lot." Marcus's heart beat faster. He felt it, the distance that had always been there between them, the invisible line the groom had crossed long ago. "Yeah, I know how it is," Marcus muttered, his voice rough. He took a step back, his eyes narrowing. "But that's not what I'm talking about. You've changed, man." The words hung in the air, thick with meaning, and the groom's smile faltered. He shifted on his feet, his gaze flickering away for a moment. "I'm still the same person, Marcus. You know that." His voice was defensive, but it lacked conviction. Marcus shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "No. You're not. You're not the same person anymore. You've become someone else. Someone I don't recognize. Someone who's more concerned with fitting in, with making your family proud, than with the guy who used to dream with me." He took a deep breath, his chest tight with the weight of his own words. "You used me, man. Our friendship became a tool for you to show off your success, but you've forgotten where we came from. You've forgotten me." The words were like fire in his mouth, burning with the heat of everything he had swallowed down over the years. He couldn't hold it in any longer. The groom's face shifted, and for the first time that night, there was a flicker of something that resembled guilt, or maybe shame. He took a step toward Marcus, his voice quieter now, more vulnerable. "It's not like that. I never meant to make you feel that way. You're my friend. Always have been." Marcus felt a wave of anger and frustration surge within him. He had heard these words before, spoken in 1,000 different ways, but they always felt empty. The guilt was there, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't real. "You don't get it, do you?" Marcus's voice cracked, but he didn't care. "You've been living in this bubble, pretending like everything's fine. But it's not. I don't belong here, man. Not in your world. Not in their world. And I'm tired of pretending I do." The silence that followed was thick, heavy. The groom stood there, unsure of what to say. But Marcus didn't wait for him to respond. He felt something shift inside him, like a dam breaking, releasing everything that had been held in for so long. With a single, sharp motion, he reached up and pulled off his bow tie. The fabric fell into his hand, and for a brief moment, it felt like the weight of all the expectations, all the judgments, had been lifted off him. He looked the groom dead in the eye. "I'm done pretending, man. This isn't who I am. I'm not some accessory in your life. I'm not a prop for you to use when it's convenient." Marcus turned away before the groom could say anything more. He wasn't going to wait for permission to be himself anymore. He wasn't going to be defined by their standards, their rules. He wasn't going to be a token, a novelty. He walked back toward the ballroom, his heart pounding, the guests all watching as he stepped onto the dance floor. The music was louder now, the rhythm pulsing through the room. But as Marcus stood there, the weight of their gazes felt different. This time, it wasn't full of judgment. This time, it was full of something else. Surprise. Unease. Maybe even respect. He stood tall, refusing to be invisible any longer. He wasn't playing by their rules anymore. The shift in the air was palpable. For the first time in his life, Marcus felt like he was finally in control of his own story. And as the silence in the room stretched on, something shifted. The power dynamics had changed. The balance had been broken. Marcus wasn't the one who had to prove anything anymore. He had already done it. The music was louder now, a slow, steady beat that filled the air and reverberated through the polished floors of the ballroom. Marcus stood in the center, alone, his back straight, his body swaying gently to the rhythm. The crowd around him seemed to fall away, their whispers and stares fading into the background. He had removed the bow tie, and with it, the invisible chains that had bound him for so long. Tonight, he wasn't just a man in a tuxedo anymore. Tonight, he was a man who had taken back his power. As he moved across the floor, he felt every step he took, not as a man seeking approval, but as one who had already earned it. He wasn't dancing for anyone but himself. He wasn't performing, wasn't putting on a show to make them feel comfortable. No. This was his moment of freedom, a release from the weight of their expectations. His feet glided effortlessly, but there was no denying the storm that raged inside of him. Each movement was a declaration, one that spoke of everything he had been through, everything he had overcome. He wasn't just dancing, he was reclaiming his dignity. The guests, watching from the sidelines, were unsure how to react. Their eyes followed him, some in awe, others in disbelief. The air felt thick with unspoken words. The same people who had looked down on him, who had whispered behind his back, were now watching in stunned silence. The shift was undeniable. They had never seen Marcus like this before. They had never seen him take control of his own narrative, never seen him command the room with the kind of quiet strength he exuded now. The groom, standing at the edge of the crowd, watched Marcus with wide eyes. His expression faltered, a mix of surprise, guilt, and confusion crossing his face. For a moment, he seemed paralyzed, as if unsure of what to do. The man who had once been his closest friend, the man he had dismissed, now stood in front of him as something else, a symbol of power that he couldn't ignore. The groom had been the one who held all the power, the one who had the wealth, the status, the connections. But now, Marcus had something that no amount of money or privilege could take away from him. He had his dignity, and in that moment, it felt more valuable than anything the groom could ever possess. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the groom approached Marcus. His steps were hesitant, slow, as if he were walking towards someone he no longer recognized. His lips parted, and for a brief second, Marcus could see the apology written across his face. He opened his mouth to speak, but Marcus raised a hand, silencing him before the words could leave his mouth. The groom's mouth snapped shut, and for the first time, Marcus saw something else in his eyes, something that had always been absent before. There was no longer a wall between them, no longer the patronizing look that Marcus had come to expect. There was only a man who saw him now, truly saw him for the first time, not as a tool or a token, but as an equal. But Marcus didn't need the apology anymore. He didn't need the recognition. He had already taken what was his. "Don't," Marcus said, his voice steady, calm, and unwavering. "You don't have to apologize." He paused, looking the groom squarely in the eyes. "What's done is done. And I've already moved past it." The groom's shoulders slumped, his face filled with regret, but Marcus wasn't looking for sympathy. He wasn't looking for pity. He had learned that he didn't need any of it. What he had found, in the midst of all this chaos, was that his worth had never been tied to their approval. The guests, still watching, seemed to hold their breath, as if waiting for something. Marcus didn't need to say anything more to the groom. The words had already been spoken through his actions. He had already proven that he was more than what they thought he was. He turned away from the groom, his back to the room, and walked toward the center of the floor once more. The guests were silent now, and as Marcus stood there, something shifted in the room. The power dynamics had changed. The man they had once mocked, the man they had once underestimated, had reclaimed his place in this space, not by force, not by aggression, but by standing tall in his own truth. As Marcus reached the center of the floor, he stopped. He looked around, his gaze sweeping over the room full of people who had never truly seen him, who had never truly known him. And in that moment, he knew that no matter how much money they had, no matter how much status or power they wielded, they could never take from him what he had found. He had found himself. He had found his dignity. The silence in the room grew heavier, as if the guests were waiting for something, for him to say something, to confirm the shift that had happened. And so he did. "I know you have your wealth, your status, your privileges." Marcus spoke, his voice clear and unwavering, carrying across the room. "But I have my dignity. And that is something you can never take away from me." The words hung in the air like a challenge, a final declaration. It was a statement that held more weight than any apology, more meaning than any material possession. He had given them everything he had, and in return, he had found his worth. With that, Marcus turned on his heel and walked away. He didn't look back. The guests, still silent, seemed paralyzed, unsure of how to respond to what had just transpired. But Marcus wasn't concerned with their reactions anymore. He had already won. As he made his way out of the ballroom, leaving the stunned guests behind, the lesson was clear. No matter how much power others had, no matter how much money or status they held, there was one thing they could never take from him: his dignity. And that, in the end, was the one thing that truly mattered. This was Marcus's redemption. His silent revolution. And in a world that often underestimated him, he had shown them all the strength that lay beneath the surface. No amount of wealth or power could ever touch that.